morning, lovelies. Today I am reacting to your Greek myth hot takes. Why am I doing that instead of doing a CaFae tale? Because those take a lot of work and effort, and I need a break. Also, the reason we're doing a Greek myth hot take reaction video is because at the time this video comes out, I will be halfway through a Kickstarter campaign for my Greek myth retelling of Eros and Psyche, Monstrous. If you want to support that, it's going to be linked in the description of the video. I basically take the Eros and Psyche myth and I make Psyche smart. That's not the only difference, but it is the biggest one. So yeah, be sure if you're interested in that, if you want to see that hit shelves next year, you can contribute to the cause. And if you're just here for the vibes, hey, welcome. So I have asked my employee to collect the hot takes for me. So this is a blind react. I had no idea what I'm going to be getting. Someone said, our first one is, hot take, the myth of Persephone and Hades gets too romanticized. He did kidnap her, and that's not romantic. I mean, maybe it's just because I learned so much, I hear so much about Greek mythology, and I've seen all the myths, and like, the bar is in hell when it comes to Greek myth. Yes, don't kidnap your girlfriend. But ironically, in the earliest stories we have of this, it's not Hades who's the bad guy. It's Zeus. Everyone agrees, oh, Zeus is the bad guy because he, as Persephone's father, is the one who sold her to Hades, and he didn't clear it with Demeter, and he did nothing to try to solve the situation until most of humanity was dead. It's definitely one of those stories where there's a lot more gray and nuance than we get. I do agree that, like, yeah, you should kidnap your wife. Even when literally everyone else is doing it, you know, Zeus, Poseidon, Cronus, just like every single male Olympian, at least, every single major male Greek god has assaulted at least one person, with the possible exception of, ironically, Ares, the god of war, which is bizarre. And yet, despite that bad start, the Hades and Persephone's relationship is like the most functional compared to all the other Olympians. And I think that's why we romanticize it today. It's because we see that they are actually more functional than Zeus and Hera, to be sure. Theseus and is what, like, you know, literally everyone is just a piping hot mess. And so I think the reason we romanticize is because we see that it ends better and we want it to start better first. But that's what happens to stories, I think, over time, as values change, as morals change, and as societies change themselves. Like, we change the stories. Art reflects reality and reality reflects art. So I think that's why Hades and Persephone has been so romanticized, is because we want them to be functional, so we have them, we kind of put the kidnapping thing under the rock. Mine is more of a lukewarm take, but Dionysus has more character and history than the drunk guy, and it's really, really interesting. And then they also added Dionysus is also a god of LGBTQ plus things, and people tend to overlook that. Dude has a lot of cool stuff going on, specifically gender identity. So I don't know much about Dionysus with gender identity. I've heard a couple of things, but I haven't done a proper deep dive into it. But yeah, he definitely has a way more than just the drunk guy. I would recommend you guys check out Overly Sarcastic Productions video on Dionysus. They track his whole history and transformation through ancient Greek history. It's a very good video. I highly recommend it. My battery is about to die. I need to plug this in. Also, fun fact. My backpack is over here. When I was in high school, I was in theater club. I was not the best actress, which if I am kind of shocked at the turn my career has taken. But I did often get background roles. You know, the guard with no lines, and, you know, the background character who gets maybe one or two lines. And one of my favorite plays, it might even be the favorite play that I was a part of, was the Bacchae, which is an ancient Greek play about Bacchus, Dionysus. And it's kind of in terms of the ancient Greek timeline, like, yes, he was a god of wine, but more than that, he was a god of insanity. And that's the type of Dionysus that we see in that play. Was really cool. And it's a tragedy. I was one of the chorus, one of the women, his women followers who ripped the king to pieces. It was fun. And what made that play really, really cool was that the director had rewritten it so that normally in ancient Greek plays, you have your actors and then you have the chorus who do chants. And the chants are typically narration, dialogue type of thing. He took those chants and instead transformed them into music. So this was technically a musical. And the music that it would create was just so haunting and in a twist. And of course, like the contents of the play itself made it such a twisted story. And so adding music to that, it was just so cool. It was such a unique experience. To do that as a high schooler too. That was really fun. And of course, being a Rick Riordan girl, I already knew everything about Greek mythology, so I loved being a part of this project. I didn't even care that I had like one line by myself and then everything else was, music with the rest of the girls. I was in heaven. I loved doing that play. That was awesome. But yeah, no, Dionysus definitely does have a lot more character in history. He had like a whole war campaign in India, canonically. It's cool. Do we know if Atlantis, I think this is supposed to be Atlantis, lost on purpose? Like the apples were, Atalanta. Okay, sorry, I misread. Do we know if Atalanta lost on purpose? Like the apples were irresistible, but she probably could have won anyway. So what this person is referencing is the myth of Atalanta. I forget the guy that Hippomenes, that's his name. Had to look it up. So Atalanta is like the only Greek hero that I'm aware of who is a woman. Like you got your Perseus, you got Theseus, you got Odysseus, all of these people, Achilles, and all these great heroes, and by hero I just mean the ancient Greek version where it's just guys doing cool stuff. And she's the only woman who is able to pull it off. And she doesn't have, to our knowledge, no divine ancestry, I don't think. She was just a normal woman, princess granted, who was raised by bears, which is a symbol of Artemis. And she went on, and again, Overlay Sarcastic Productions does have a video on this too. You should check it out. But anyway, she makes a name for herself by going on a hunt and like killing this magical creature that I believe was also sent by Artemis as retribution for an insult. And Atalanta was one of the two people who dealt the fatal blow. The other guy she kind of had a love interest with, but he ended up dying for complicated family reasons. So we have this famous woman in ancient Greece who is single, and of course all the guys want to marry her. And so to get them off her back, she basically says, okay, anyone who wants to marry me, I challenge you to a foot race. If you win, you get to marry me. If I win, I chop off your head. Which gets about half the guys to back off, but the other half take her up on it, thinking like, it's the classic, I know I'm an average man, but I can totally win in a physical sport against a professional female athlete. Yeah, doesn't work. So she ends up killing a lot of guys this way. And then this other guy, Hippomenes, shows up, also known as Melania. Interesting. So Hippomenes shows up, and he's not very athletic. He's sweet and dorky and kind of nerdy, and even Atalanta doesn't want to see him killed, but he's determined to win. So he goes to the gods for help, but he does not go to Artemis, he does not go to Athena, he doesn't go to Hermes, the god of athletes, for heirs, none of that, no. He goes to Aphrodite, the goddess of love. Explains the situation and begs for her help. And she's like, oh, boo, I got you. This is adorable. So she gives him three golden apples. And what happens is, so he and Atalanta have this race, and he gets ahead, and she's starting to get the lead on him, because again, raised by bears, and he throws a golden apple that distracts her, and so she goes off course to pick it up, and he gets a solid lead. And then she is overtaking him again, and then he throws the second apple, and she veers off to get it. And then at the end of the race, he throws the third apple, and that's what allows him to cross the finish line. And the way it's usually written in the original Greek myth stories is that, she was so enchanted by these magical divine apples that she completely forgot about the race, and, he outsmarted her. And it's one of those, guys win the day again. Silly woman should just, get married and be happy about it type of bullshit. But of course, there is the take that Atalanta knew exactly what was going on and lost on purpose, thus allowing her to spare this guy's life, marry a guy who was actually kind of sweet and likes her for her, and also allows her to do it while saving face, because she didn't lose because she's bad at racing. She lost because he was aided by the gods. The gods literally had to intervene to get her to lose this race. So yeah, it's like many Greek myths. It has a lot of interpretations, and I agree with this one. I do prefer that interpretation where she sees what's happening and loses on purpose. Anyway, my favorite version of Persephone's story: she went down to find the underworld without a leader and took it upon herself. So that actually comes from, that is a very modern take. It got started in the 80s. A lot of people think that, the original version, before ancient Greece even really, it was Persephone who went down to find it, without a leader, and she's the one who was in charge of it. And it doesn't have a whole lot to back it up. I mean, there's some archaeological evidence that suggests that maybe in the Macedonian Greece is kind of the ancient Greece of ancient Greece. You have Macedonian Greece, which we know very little about because it is just so old. Then you have the Greek Dark Ages, where everything fell apart and nothing got written down because it was just such a fucking mess. Possibly started by either the Trojan War or the real version of the Trojan War. And then you have classical Greece the way we think of it. And it's possible that the Macedonian Greece, a lot of the Olympians were Macedonian. Hera, Zeus, Poseidon. Poseidon was actually top dog. Zeus wasn't king of the gods. That was Poseidon, because the Macedonians preferred chthonic, earthbound deities, and him being the earth shaker that allowed him to do that. So there's that, but, they didn't have Hades. But they did have, possibly, we don't know, but it's very possible that they had a version of Persephone. Or at the very least, the person who was in charge of the underworld was a woman. And this does, we're not sure if it's, it's very, very gray, very unknown about Macedonia. What we do know is that, who was, not Mesoamerica, Mesopotamia. That's what it was. And the Babylonians, they had a goddess of the underworld, a lady of the underworld, not a lord or king of the underworld. And we do know that they had a pretty big impact through the later Phoenicians onto the ancient Greek world. That's how Aphrodite happened. Aphrodite was a Phoenician goddess who descended from a Babylonian Mesopotamian goddess. And it's very possible that had to say do it. We just don't know. This shit is so old, and there's so little actual evidence that it's very guessworky. So yeah, it's a possibility. I just don't know if it's ancient Greek. So yeah, but having said that, I do like girl power stuff. Hercules is overrated. By the same token, Sisyphus is underrated, mostly because most people don't know the full tale. Hercules being overrated, I can see that. I mean, frankly, one of my favorite ancient Greek heroes is Odysseus, because he tends to use brains more than brawn, but Hercules also does have to be sneaky sometimes. It does make sense that he was just so popular in the ancient Greek world that, and an old deity too, he was around for a while, which means that, the longer a figure exists in the popular consciousness, the more stories you get. And the more stories you get, the more hype it gets. So it does make sense. I'm met on Hercules. Sisyphus is a character. If you don't know, that's the guy who is condemned in the underworld to constantly push a boulder up a hill, and just before it reaches the top, it slips from his grasp and it rolls all the way back down, and he has to do it over and over and over again. And he's condemned to do that because of the way that he pushed up dying. Like, he straight up locked Thanatos, the ancient Greek god of death. That was not Hades, but by the way, Hades was lord of the dead. Thanatos was their grim reaper, death itself. He straight up locked him in a box for like a month when he came to collect him, and he was condemned to die by the god because Sisyphus was breaking guest right, which is a big no-no in ancient Greece. Guest right was huge. It's odd for us in the modern day to really comprehend that because of our whole stranger danger. Why would we let some rando into our house type of thing? But in ancient Greek world, guest right was sacred. It was divine. Like, they didn't have hotels. So if you were a newcomer in town or whatever, you could straight up knock on any stranger's door and be like, hey, I need to spend the night. And they would be like divinely bound, like honor bound to put you up for the night. Obviously there were a lot of rules and regulations around this, but yeah, that was like a thing. And most importantly, hosts treated, the guest like a guest. You don't kill them and steal their stuff, which is what Sisyphus was doing. So the guy was condemned to die, and then he locked him in a box instead, and just like did fine. When he was dragged down to the underworld, he managed to convince Persephone to send him back up so he could get his affairs in order for just for 3 days, I promise. And then, of course, he just lived a stupid long life. And then finally died of old age. And the whole pushing the boulder up the hill and having it roll back down is supposed to be symbolic of how stupid and pointless it is to try to outrun death, because eventually it will come for you. Achilles and his best friend weren't cousins, they were lovers. That is true. Patroclus. Yeah. That in ancient Greece, they were absolutely written as lovers. Like, that was a straight up fact. And then medieval Europe, Renaissance Europe, and the Victorians got a hold of it, and that's where we get a lot of no homo. That's why the Victorians especially are the reason why, yes, we know a lot about these Greek myth stories, but also why so many people are surprised at how gay it all is. Like, yeah, dude, they were gay. It's ancient Greece. Jason shouldn't be a hero. He didn't actually do anything. It was all everyone else, especially Medea, poor girl. So I have not read the original story of the Argonauts, which is what Jason's whole deal was. Jason is the guy who took the Golden Fleece. That was his claim to fame. He was supposed to inherit a kingdom. His able king uncle said, oh, well, I'll give you the kingdom if you prove yourself, so get me the Golden Fleece instead. So he assembles a crew of heroes. Exactly which heroes show up, it depends on the story. Hercules is almost always like on board at first, and then he gets left behind during one of the crazy things that happens. So he was in charge of that ship, in that case, captaining a ship and keeping everyone from killing each other. That's nothing to sneeze at. But yeah, no, the big thing of getting to that kingdom, taking the Golden Fleece, getting it back, that was all Medea. Medea was the princess of that kingdom that had the Golden Fleece, and due to the intervention of Hera, who sponsored Jason, Jason was not a demigod, by the way. That's part of why Hera liked him. He wasn't Zeus's kid. Hera, to help out Jason, got Cupid, Eros, to shoot a bold arrow at Medea, making her fall in love with him. And because she was a powerful sorceress, she was the one who told him how to go through the challenges that would allow him to hit the fleece. She was the one who knocked the dragon out that was guarding the golden fleece with magic. She's the one who helped them escape. She literally did do everything, and she was a major player. And then, when they came back, because Medea's methods were so murdery, Jason was not allowed to inherit his kingdom. And so instead they get put up, again, guest right by another kingdom. And they were the royal guests there for a while. And then Jason decided, you know what, I'm going to take up a mistress, bang the princess of this family that's housing us, and marry her and have her be, start a proper Greek royal lineage. I can't necessarily be king, but my kids could be king. And then Medea will be like, my barbarian mistress. And it'll be fine. It was not fine. But yeah, no, Medea is kind of the hero of that story. And I use that word very lightly because she didn't murder her children. I kind of agree with this. He's the one kind of got the gang together and managed to keep everyone somewhat in line. But it was Medea who did most of the things, which I think the ancient Greeks actually did kind of agree with, since she gets center stage in both of those stories. Poseidon would drown the world for his people, family, sons, daughters, lover, spouse. Theseus got disowned, though, and he deserved it. I disagree, because Poseidon is, if you know about the story of Atlantis, the original rulers of Atlantis were Poseidon's demigod children, and it was their descendants that were ruling it, and he sank it when they got too uppity. But Theseus absolutely deserved to get disowned. Theseus is a fucking mess. I don't know what Athens saw in him. The TLDR of this one is Icarus was murdered. I don't think Icarus, so Icarus is the guy who his father, Daedalus, was the famous inventor. He created the maze for the Minotaur. That was one of the biggest ones that he did. But and then the King Minos, locked him up in a tower with his son Icarus, and to escape, he and Icarus made these massive wings held together with wax, and Daedalus warned Icarus that you can't fly too close to the sun or else the wax will melt, and you'll fall in your death, and you can't go too close to the ocean because then the water can, like a big enough wave can bring you down. And Icarus was, once they were flying, Icarus was like, holy shit, I'm flying, this is the coolest thing ever, and then went up to the sun, and the wax melted the sun, and the sun melted the wax, and he plummeted to his death. Sometimes, in some versions, it is straight up Helios or Apollo, whoever's in charge of the sun chariot at that time, who are just like, yeah, no, the hubris, buddy, check it, and purposefully kill him. Icarus was murdered. I don't think Icarus was properly educated on what would happen if he flew too close to the sun. Also, as someone who works with wax, how hot was that sun? Because that wax was probably beeswax, and that takes a lot to melt. Well, the ancient Greeks didn't understand that if you go super, 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 super high up, you run out of oxygen. So in the story, he probably got really fucking close to the sun, closer than he actually would in the real world. Disagree. The versions that I read, Daedalus is pretty fucking clear. Someone else mentioned, not to mention Daedalus, in another tale, he tries to kill his nephew out of jealousy. He couldn't stand having someone possibly be a rival to him, and when his nephew showed signs of ingenuity, well, that's why he was in Crete. He ran from Athens. So it isn't too out of character for his hubris pride to have a say. The only version of this myth that I know is the one that Rick Riordan talked about in the Battle of the Labyrinth before the Percy Jackson series. And in that version, he straight up did kill his nephew. Wouldn't surprise me. Yeah, I don't know enough to have a straight opinion about that one. Hades isn't the god of death. He's the god of the dead. Thanatos is the god of death. So many people don't understand that they're different. Exactly. I did just say that. And they are 100% correct. Hades is the administrator, basically. He's the paperwork guy. Thanatos is the guy who actually goes into the field and does the work. Not a hot take because it's actually canon, but I know too many PTO fans don't believe this. Ares is not shitty to his daughters. He will burn the earth for them. This is 100% true. In fact, there's this one story, and this is why, related to an earlier thing I said about Ares not being a rapist. There was a story where one of Poseidon's kids assaults one of Ares' daughters, and Ares kills Poseidon's kid. And Poseidon is like, no, you don't get to do that. You know, Poseidon is one of the, if not the biggest rapist of the pantheon. So Poseidon takes Ares to court and is like, Zeus, you got to punish him for this. And I forget exactly which goddesses it was. I'm pretty sure Hera and Demeter, and possibly, or I forget who the third one was, but 3 goddesses basically straight up said, looked at Zeus and said, he killed a rapist. He's clean, like, he's fine. Like, and Zeus was like, you know what, I really don't want to start a fight with my wife over this. And was like, just don't do it again, Ares. So yeah, no, Ares, not shitty to his daughters. He is, you know, canonically, by ancient Greek standards, very, very good with his kids. Yeah, which is, it's a shame that so many of the ancient Greeks did not like Ares. I mean, he was actually pretty cool. Medusa was wrongfully killed. Should have just left the poor girl alone. On that note, the curse was given to protect her, but no, men are too arrogant. The Medusa debate. I need to do a proper Medusa v. Curtius CaFae Tales video. It is scheduled. So, if you don't know, Medusa is a very controversial figure. She's the gal with the snakes for hair who, if you look at her dead on, you turn into stone. That's Medusa. In the earliest tellings we have of this myth, she was never transformed. She was always a monster. Always. In fact, she had 2 sisters who also had snakes for hair, but they didn't have the petrifying gaze. It wasn't until Ovid, a Roman, rewrote the story and gave her the tragic backstory of she was a woman, specifically a priestess of Athena, and was assaulted by Poseidon, and to punish her for that assault, Athena turned her into a monster. And Ovid did that because he had a lot of problems with authority. You look at his life and it's like, yeah, this guy hated authority. And that, obviously, you know, that later one, which is frankly more interesting, is the take that most people know when they know anything about Medusa. And it has caused a debate in our modern era because in the ancient Greek world, even today, but especially back then, it was, you didn't really punish rapists. The shame was always on the victim. Horrible, horrendous. They just, it I have many thoughts, but basically in ancient Greece, women were not people, not legally, not really culturally, they were property. And if someone assaulted them, well, you probably shouldn't have let them on. Well, what were you wearing? You know, that bullshit. And the only way that an assault survivor could regain any amount of honor after being assaulted was to kill herself. That's how bad it was. However, there is so, you know, Athena punishing Medusa for her own assault is like, you know, that made sense in ancient Greek world, especially in the minds of ancient Greek men. And the men are really the only opinions we get because they were the only ones who were taught how to read and write. Women were not taught how to read and write. There are very few exceptions, like Sappho, but that's about it. But of course, so we don't really know what women thought of this story. And even then, like, even if they didn't think it at the time, and in a lot of modern discourse, the idea is that Athena wasn't trying to punish Medusa. She was trying to protect her. Because Athena can't go against Poseidon. She knows that. All right, he's one of the big 3. It's not happening. But what she can do is she can protect her priestess from being assaulted again. And so she's going to give her this power to turn men to stone if they try to touch her. That's where that thinking goes. And we also know, I don't know how true this is, but I have heard talk that in the ancient Greek version of like domestic violence shelters, I don't know if ancient Greece did have domestic violence shelters, which is what makes me hesitate about this. But Medusa's head was seen as like a protective charm specifically for women. You wouldn't really do that if it was if everyone viewed her as a monster and as a victim. You wouldn't really do that. So I don't really know. I need to look further into like how the ancient Greeks thought about that. I would call this a justified modern take. Maybe it wasn't what the ancient Greek writers intended, but they've been dead for 2,000 years, so fuck up. Okay, Eurylochus is an even bigger ass than everyone thinks. He doesn't have any redeeming qualities, and insult to injury, he's Odysseus' brother-in-law, having married Odysseus' sister. So I have not listened to the epic, the musical, so I know there are a lot of Eurylochus fans out there. I did read the original Odyssey, though, and the only time he is named in the Odyssey is when he dooms the surviving crew by sacrificing the ancient, the sacred cattle, so that way they can eat, because they were starving. And literally, and Odysseus, had been warned. They'd all been warned: don't eat the cattle, don't hurt them, don't kill them, don't do anything to them, or you will die. And then they get stranded on this island with the cattle for a month because of Zeus, and their food runs out, and Eurylochus convinces the rest of the crew that, like, do you want to die a slow, lingering death of starvation, or do you want to die quick and sudden the way the gods are going to do it, if they do it? And the crew agreed with that. Odysseus didn't, which is why he's the one who survived. But yeah, that's how that went. So people saying, "Oh, I love Eurylochus forever." I was very confused until I found out, oh, Epic the Musical actually gives him more of a character. Hephaestus is cool representation of disability in myth, and I don't think that's talked about enough. I agree. Hephaestus is the god of the forge. The way the story goes is that obviously there are a couple of ways the story goes, but the most popular one in ancient Greece is that he was born so ugly that Hera was disgusted and she chucked him off the mountain. And that's how he broke his at least one leg. And he ended up in the ocean raised by some nymphs. And he was, of course, very skilled with metalwork and making jewelry and all that jazz, which they loved. And they were showing it off at a gathering on Olympus. And Hera was so enchanted by the jewelry. She's like, "Girl, where did you get that?" And then nymphs are like, "Oh, it's the sad thing. There's this guy who lives in the ocean with us. He was like thrown off the mountain or something. Like, we don't know the full story, but his legs were broken. He's really ugly, but he has really great, he's really great at making necklaces and jewelry, obviously." And Hera's like, "Oh." So she recalled him to the mountain and turned him into an Olympiad so he can make her jewelry. He doesn't usually take center stage in myths, though. He's very much in the back seat. Normally when Hephaestus' name is dropped in myths, it is because he made the sword or shield or armor that the hero of the story is using. So by modern standards, I would say no, because we don't see him all that much. But it's still nice to see that, okay, even back then there was disability representation. People tend to overlook / downplay the role of LGBTQ themes in certain myths, and I think it serves to reshape the way we think about them as a whole. Yes, Achilles and Patroclus were lovers in the original myth, but they're not the only popular myth this happened to. I often wonder what the original myth of Icarus said, because even in modern retellings, Apollo calls for him and urges him to get closer to him. I haven't heard that. That's interesting. Sometimes I wonder if that infatuation had something more to do with it back when it was written. There are, of course, other examples, but those two are the ones that get me some bad nights. Get me bad some nights. Yeah, like I said, when you look at the oldest ancient Greek records of these stories, very, very queer. But of course, in medieval and Renaissance Europe and then Victorian era, that just was not ever going to fly. You can't, even in the Victorian eras, sometimes with Victorian, because they were so repressed, you could get a lot of queer themes that they thought was subtle back then, but these days we're just like, they gay. Carmilla being a really good example of that. But yeah, no, that is why that's why a lot of people think that, are so surprised to find out that Zeus and Poseidon and Apollo are bi, or pan, depends. Apollo is kind of problematic when it comes to lovers. Cough, cough, Daphne, Cassandra, Caparissus, or there's like a whole list. Hyacinthus is fine, though. People also overlook how jealous he gets Orion. Hyacinthus is like the one name on this list that I'm going to push back on, because with Hyacinthus, it actually wasn't Apollo's fault. Hyacinthus was this cute Spartan prince that Apollo was into, and they dated for a while, and one day they're throwing a discus, which is this basically a very heavy metal ancient Greek version of Frisbee. And in some of the earlier stories, it's just a freak accident. The discus flies back, the wind kind of carries it and whams Hyacinthus in the head, killing him instantly. In other versions, it is explicitly the god of the west wind, Zephyr, who was jealous that Apollo got the cute Spartan prince, and ascribed to the whole "if I can't have him, no one can" type of thing, and did it on purpose. But yeah, no, everyone else, Daphne, Cassandra especially, he's got a problem with that. And I do think that these days more people are clued into that. I think the more people I talk to about Greek mythology, a lot of them do agree that Apollo is pretty problematic. Most of the Greeks are, frankly. Like, you're hard-pressed to find a single Greek god who is not problematic. With Orion, that's interesting, because like Orion's death, it seriously does depend on the telling. There is one where Orion is the great hunter. And in all versions of the story, he's encounters Artemis at least once. And in this version, he and Artemis are friends, just friends. But Apollo thinks that his goddess of virginity sister, or goddess of lesbianism sister, it depends on who's telling the story, is gonna fall for Orion and marry him and whatever. And so he gets super jealous and then tricks her into killing Orion, basically saying, "Hey, see that speck in the water there? I bet you can't hit that from here." And she's like, "Bet." And she hits it, and it turns out to be Orion. I think the myth of Agdistis deserves more attention. I have no idea who that is, so I don't know. I'll have to look it up later. I may get some hate for this, especially given another hot take in here in my other one, but it needs to be said. Persephone chose to stay when Hades kidnapped her, if it even was a kidnapping. She could have gone with him herself, and Demeter and Zeus just got their panties in a twist and framed it as such. Maybe, I don't know, the way the ancient Greeks wrote women is not great. Women tend to be extraordinarily passive and have things happen to them in ancient Greek. It's very rare to have an actual, more proactive woman in an ancient Greek story. And the way the ancient Greeks wrote about Persephone, at least in classical Greece, is that she was, just by virtue of being a woman, less powerful than the men around her, most specifically Hades. And also with the whole pomegranate thing, keeping her tied there. I don't know. I think that's a bit more of a modern one. I know there's at least one modern retelling where they do it that way, but I don't think that's a legit take for like the ancient story. But it is a cool modern rewrite. Medusa is one of the only beings in all of Greek mythology who is truly not at fault for any events in her mythology. Very true. My hot take: incest issue in mythology is overblown. Yes, they are related, but the reason we are naturally adverse to incest is because of the potential for genetic issues, which isn't a concern for supernatural divine beings. I'm more concerned about the power imbalance with consent when divine beings have relations with mortals or demigods. I do kind of agree, especially with when the mythology is just so everything started with this one person, and this one person created a couple of beings who, just by virtue of doing that, were siblings. And who else are you going to make babies with? So, like, I get that, but I also find it, I get concerned when people are so defensive of incest in stories. But yeah, I'm more concerned about the power imbalance with consent when divine beings have relations with mortals or demigods. Yeah, that is absolutely true. Because, like, even when the stories are, like, you know, like Dionysus's mom, whose name I can never pronounce, Semele, Seni something. She knew that she was banging Zeus. And the way the story is written, she was like, you know, basically like and as a lovely Greek maiden, she would have been a teenager. Yeah, how can you possibly like, if the king of the gods is telling you he wants to bang you and you know about the horrible things that have happened to people who say no to the god, you can't consent. If you can't safely say no, you can't say yes. And in the case of Semele, who even though like, you know, is enthusiastically saying yes, at the same time she was basically a child. I don't think Hades was that bad of a husband or anything, to be honest. He was pretty loyal and gave Persephone like everything he could from what I remember. And yeah, that's like going back to, you know, like what we were talking about earlier, that's kind of why modern people tend to brush the kidnapping at the beginning under the rug, because after that, when they are married and the status quo is established, yeah, even the ancient Greeks were just like, he was really good, like, you know, if you have to choose anyone in the ancient Greek pantheon to be married to, Hades is a pretty good contender. I wish Macaria would get more attention. I have no idea who that is. I'm sorry. This may not be a hot take, but Hades is not antisocial or evil. He's just tired of everyone's drama. Yeah, you know what? If I was a member of this pantheon and I had to deal with, you know, I was related to Zeus, Hera, Apollo, Dionysus, Athena, like all the others, I would also kind of choose to just stay in the underworld and chill out and stay away from that bullshit for as long as I could get away with. So, yeah, and him, Hecate, Persephone for half of the year. Persephone kind of has the best of both worlds. You know, she gets to hang out with her mom and see her friends and family for half the year. And then once she gets really sick of their BS, she gets to go down to the underworld and be like, oh my God, Hades, like the shit that happened this year. You know, that's what they do. Ares doesn't see a love goddess when he looks at Aphrodite. He sees a war goddess. Very possible. Fun fact, Aphrodite, when, like I mentioned before, Aphrodite was originally a Phoenician goddess who was originally derived from Ishtar, the Babylonian goddess. And because Astarte was her Phoenician name. And yeah, both of the Ishtar and Astarte were war goddesses and also love goddesses. They were they had both. And those communities were totally fine with that. And then she was taken, you know, her people went to Greece and they were taken there. And the Spartans were one of the first to take to have a good look at this brand new goddess. And they loved her because they were just like, oh, sweet, a powerful woman, war goddess. And she also is a goddess of love. Yeah, sweet. Sign us up. Let's go. But everywhere else in Greece had a problem with the idea of a love goddess also being a war goddess. They saw it as an inherent contradiction of values. This is why Athena, a war goddess, is a virgin goddess, because they were just like, you cannot be a woman who enjoys war and love. Like, you just can't do it. It's bullshit, but that was what they thought. That was the thing at the time, which is why everywhere outside of Sparta in the Greek-speaking world, Aphrodite was just a love goddess, quote unquote. And in fact, in the Iliad, which I have read, there's a part where she, Aphrodite is, on the battlefield helping the injured, getting her injured off, and she gets either an arrow or spear in the hand. And it gets tended to, and Zeus specifically singles her out to scold her, saying that, you shouldn't be on the battlefield. Women don't belong in the battlefield. And she's like, I don't know what I was thinking. And that's the type of thing, like, as a writer, that's the type of thing where you only put that in there if there's, like, an actual debate about that going on. And so what likely happened was, Aphrodite, not a Macedonian goddess. So like you have Macedonian Greece, and then you have the Greek Dark Ages. And then like right after the Dark Ages, one of the first things that gets written down is the Iliad and the Odyssey. And that's when this conversation happens. That's when Aphrodite is firmly in the I'm a love goddess, not a war goddess camp. And so what likely happened was in the Greek Dark Ages, Astarte gets introduced to ancient Greece via Sparta. Sparta renames her Aphrodite, and everyone else in Greece is just like, okay, we're getting rid. We'll take the love goddess part, but she can't be a war goddess too. And then that whole debate got wrapped up in the Iliad, because remember, the Iliad and the Odyssey were told verbally, orally. It was an oral tradition. And then those stories, once they'd been told for generations, that probably changed because, that's what happens with oral stories and even written down stories. Changed over, the decades, centuries of the Greek Dark Ages, that by the time classical Greece rolls around and they're written down, she is firmly in love god territory. But I wouldn't be surprised, that's Aphrodite as a war goddess does need more attention, and I'm kind of annoyed that I was unable to really do that in my book, Monstrous. I do haven't mentioned that she used to be a war goddess. That's kind of how I wrote it, where like, she was a war goddess, and then over time she's just kind of like, what, not into it as much as I used to be. I'd rather pay more attention to like the love and sex and fertility aspects. But yeah, that should be like a new, like, we need like more modern stories with like, focus on Ares and Aphrodite is has more of a war goddess aspect to her. I'd love to see that. Hecate was a Titan, might be why Zeus didn't mess with her much. So Hecate, who has a ton of spelling variations and whatnot, is a minor chthonic goddess. She hangs out in the underworld. And she is the goddess of witchcraft, necromancy, and crossroads, also choices. And her animal representations are dogs and crows. She's the triple-headed goddess. Which probably had, like, got into neo-pagans and Wiccans especially kind of get into that. She was kind of an early representation of that. And she doesn't have a whole lot of myths. Her biggest claim to fame by modern standards is that in the myth of Persephone being kidnapped by Hades and Demeter searching the world for her, Hecate heard the kidnapping but didn't see it. So she's one of the first people that Demeter goes to, and Hecate is just like, oh yeah, okay, so and that's what that ruckus probably was. I don't know what happened, I just know that she was here at this time and then something happened, so let's go to Helios. He probably saw something. That's kind of her big thing. But yeah, her being, she wasn't like, she's not part of the, the core six, that are descended from Kronos and Rheas, Zeus, Hera, Hades, beside Demeter. She's not part of that part of the family tree. She's like a different branch of the family tree. And yeah, and that granted, Zeus, I don't think Zeus really assaulted a whole lot of Titans. He slept with a bunch of Titans, including Leto, Artemis, and Apollo's mother. But I don't think he, as powerful as he is, I don't think he could actually assault them. So I kind of agree with this. It's got merit. Hecate does appear. She is actually a major figure in Monstrous, by the way. I tried to focus more on the lesser known minor deities in my retelling, simply because like we spend so much time with the Olympians. They get so much press, and it's like let's try to focus on there are hundreds of deities. Let's give someone else some limelight. Okay, one last one. Someone agreeing with the Hecate was a Titan, also goddess of witchcraft. Also, to my knowledge, Nyx, primordial goddess of night, is the only god Zeus fears. Although I don't remember where I read that. I also read that. God, I don't recall where, but yeah, Nyx is she's a primordial. All right, the way the ancient Greek world works, and this is the last of the takes, so I'm just gonna close this. So the way the ancient Greek world works, the way the family is formed, like you have chaos who splits out the primordials: death, love, Gaia, earth, and night. I believe night was one of the big four. Because I know the primordials were first, and then the Titans, and then the gods. That's how that went. Yep, goddess of night. Yeah, it was Tartarus, Nyx, Erebus, Eros. Those are her immediate siblings. Tartarus is like, part of the underworld. Nyx being the goddess of night. Erebus is the personification of darkness. Erebus and Nyx were the ones who usually got together first, and like they crank out the day-night cycle. And then Eros is love, the driving force for creation. Sometimes, like later on, he would be ascribed being Aphrodite's son, and that's where we get Cupid from. So it's like, he is either this ancient primordial deity that even the gods fear, or the Greeks can he did kind of double thing. Two things can be true at once. Or he's Aphrodite's, younger kid. And the way that I went with Monstrous is because I hate, just words cannot describe how much I hate the trope of ancient, powerful man falling for teenage girl. I hate that trope. I hate it when he's even just a couple hundred years old. Never mind, was there for the dawn of the creation of the universe. No, we're not doing that. What are they even talking? He's not going to be impressed with her. So I went with child of Aphrodite, and not just that. Those who are really into Greek mythology and Greek history are probably going to hate me for this, but I basically made him at the start of the book. He is 20 years old. Yeah, he had just turned 20 at the start of the book, and by the time I put up Psyche's age at 17, even though ancient Greek girls, especially royal girls, tended to be married off at by the time they were 15, unless they were from Sparta, which Psyche is not. Sparta was better about that. Women typically weren't married until they were in their 20s. But yeah, Psyche is not Spartan, so that wouldn't apply to her. However, I justified it by having it be her parents wanted to keep her, to parade her around their town as the new goddess Aphrodite, to get all the offerings that should have been going to Aphrodite's temple to them, and they put up her marriage for as long as humanly possible. That they got an offer that they couldn't refuse. Which is why Psyche is 17, almost 18 at the start of the story. And then when she and Eros get together, she is 19 and he is 21, 22. And that's as much of an age gap as I can bring myself to write. Now, I don't mind if it's centuries old being and someone in their 20s, or better yet, their 30s. That's fine. That's totally fine. But teenage girl, no, we're not doing that. So yeah, the Monstrous Kickstarter is still going strong. Thank you to all of those who gave me your Greek myth hot takes. This is really fun. Next week should be another CaFae Tales video. The dog duel. That's what I'm going to schedule for next week. That's fun. That's going to be a fun one. Patrick narrates that one. Yeah, that's all I got. Bye, lovelies.